Okay, let me bring in Dean Baker. Dean Baker is the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR. He's the author of The Conservative Nanny State, How the Wealthy Use the Government to Stay Rich and Get Richer. Sound familiar? He also has a blog on the American Prospect called Beat the Press, where he discusses the media's coverage of economic issues. Another woeful story there. Welcome, Dean Baker.
Thanks for having me on.
Very good. First question, take it wherever you want. Where do we stand today? I woke up to look at the L.A. Times headlines, and above the fold, above the name, showed markets from Tokyo, moving Tokyo, Hong Kong, westward, I guess, and just the response to the passage of the bailout bill has not been good.
Well, it is striking. I'll make a couple points on that. First off, the stock markets are not the way to evaluate the economy. And
agreed.
Markets go all over the place, and, it tells you what people who are trading on Wall Street think about the world, which, isn't necessarily indicative of anything. These were people who are willing to pay, billions of dollars for Pets.com back in 2000. So, that isn't always indicative of anything, So that I'd say doesn't speak to necessarily success or failure of the policy. But a point I would make on that is if the shoe were on the other foot here, you probably recall that, last Monday when the bill was originally voted down by the House, President Bush seized on the 1,000-point drop in the Dow to say, look, we just lost $1 trillion. See how bad things are. Look how dumb these people are. And then there was this incredible drumbeat in the media that, we had these know-nothings in Congress. And look, they just cost us $1 trillion of wealth. So they played that game. Now let's imagine that Thursday Congress had again voted down a second time and the markets did exactly what they have since done.
Right. We
would have heard near hysteria. So this just shows the incredible kind of double standard dishonesty in the media and the reporting on this, that, when the administration, when the Wall Street people get a policy through and the markets react poorly, as they obviously have, no one talks about it. That would be rude, right?
Yeah.
But when they don't get the policy, the know-nothings have taken over, and look, it just really just shows the lack of integrity that we've seen in the discussion of this issue.
Okay, so you're saying that the fact that the Wall Streets of the world have not responded positively, or perhaps, one could say, it would be even worse. But
no doubt they would, and you can always come up with a counterfactual.
But I agree with you. Let's place that aside. They are a barometer, but it's never clear of what. But what I think they were held to be a barometer of was the psychology of people, which is so crucial to these things and how far they go down and how quickly they come up and so on. But what do you feel are the real issues and where we should be looking to see where we are and where we're likely to be going in the next weeks or months?
Okay, well, the legitimate points, there are legitimate issues that need to be addressed by a bailout, a rescue package that this package was at least in principle designed to address, is that, our credit system's freezing up, that, the banks are so distrustful of each other. They all know that they have huge amounts of bad debt, so they're reluctant to lend even for short periods of time from one to the other.
And let me just say for listeners who have probably learned a lot about this in the last few weeks but may not have been hip to it as I wasn't, this interbank trading, this constant trading back and forth is what keeps it going. And when that freezes, everyone's in trouble, yes?
That's right. Or everyone could be in trouble, I would say. It doesn't immediately lead to that, but it can create a situation. Anyhow, that continues to be a problem. The spread between the Treasury bill rate, what you'd pay on a 90-day Treasury bill versus what you pay on a 90-day interbank loan is actually higher today than it was before the bill passed. So it's currently about 3.5%. It had actually been as high as about 3.8%, but it's a little lower now. But it was about 3.2%. Back before the bill passed.
And what does that mean?
Well, this is an indication. This is 90-day loans, and think of the Treasury bills being totally safe in the sense that people are pretty confident the U.S. will still be here in 90 days and paying its debts. So the question is, how much additional interest do banks insist on to lend to each other for 90 days? In other words, they think there's a real risk that whoever they're lending that money.
I see. How much do they rate their fellow bank versus a U.S. Treasury bond?
Right, and usually that spread would be 20, 30, 40 0.2%, 0.4%, and now it's 3.5%.
Ah.
So it's a very big difference. So that suggests those markets are still real tight. Now, one of the things that the Fed could do, and I feel stupid because I didn't know they could do this till I talked to a reporter who covers the Fed regularly, knows them very well. Monday, I didn't know they could do this. They have started today lending money directly to non-financial corporations, because this is at the end of the day what we care about. So what that means is, ordinarily, pick your industry, United Airlines or Verizon, telephone company, they regularly finance their ongoing operations by borrowing what's called the commercial paper market. It's typically 90 days, doesn't have to be, but it's most frequently 90 days. That market had been shutting down, so they've been having a harder time doing that because the banks are usually the immediate buyers of, the Fed has the legal authority. Again, I didn't know this. The Fed has the legal authority to directly enter the commercial paper market and buy Verizon's commercial paper, buy Boeing's commercial paper. So the concern that was raised last week that, oh my God, Boeing's going to have to lay workers off because they can't sell their money in the commercial paper market. Well, I thought that was always exaggerated, but it turns out to have been complete fallacy. The Fed could step in there tomorrow and buy Boeing's commercial paper.
So if I could ask a question, interpret this. In other words, Paulson's bailout, which with many additions and so on is a version of that is what passed, was to buy bad debt. But what you're saying is the Federal Reserve could take money as it's doing and give it directly to someone who produces a good rather than someone who merely has made a bad loan.
Exactly.
And now they're having to do that, but that could have been the thrust of it instead of the surprise at the end.
Exactly. And, the story that, President Bush gave us, and much of the media gave us, was that, oh, my God, we have no alternatives. Washington Post actually ran a front-page article on Saturday where they said, Henry Paulson told President Bush, there is no plan B. If we don't do this, everything goes down. And basically Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve Board, said the same thing. Well, it turns out there was a plan B. They could just lend the money directly to Boeing and the other non-financial corporations that need money. This is not ideal. I mean, that's not how I think the economy should be run. But, we're in crisis mode, and the question is what's the best thing to do to, keep things going.
But if I could point out, if I loan money to Boeing, and I assume Boeing's going to survive this, then the operative word there is loan, right?
Yeah,
the government will get paid back. If I buy bad debts at overpriced rates so that I can infuse psychological confidence to casino players, the chances of me getting anything back are almost nothing.
Well, no, we won't get. It's not we won't get nothing back, but we won't get. We're deliberately overpaying. So these are assets that, maybe they're worth 30 cents on the dollar. We're going to pay 40 or 50 cents on the dollar. And at the end of the day, we'll end up reselling them for probably something like 30, 35 cents on the dollar. So we're going to lose much of that $700 billion. I don't think there's any two ways about it.
Right. And had we directed it directly at companies that we knew were going to survive, that might have been avoided. I've got just a few more minutes. There were lots of other. It seemed to me, I get a lot of emails and I read a lot. There were a lot of other things, it seemed, we could do, things having to do with going directly to the housing loans, going directly to the likely to foreclose homeowners and so on. What's the state of some of those other Plan B, C, D?
Well, I think just about everything's off the table. I think there's no momentum on anything else at this point. There might be some efforts to revive some alternatives since at this point I don't think too many people think that this is the end of the story. I think, in the best case scenario, we're going to get through this immediate crisis and we're going to probably still have banks in very bad shape, even with buying up $700 billion of their bad loans. So it's possible that some alternative proposals will again be put on the table, but at the moment at least I don't think anything else is being actively considered.
And what you're saying there is that we've shot our wad. In other words, this was the big, this was the big output of money. It was put in this way. It eventually passed, and so that's why there's not these other alternatives, which...
Well, it's more political than a financial issue.
Very
it's
good.
Not that in principle we don't have the money. The point is that, this is, there's a lot of political momentum behind this. Now, how do you get the people who just voted for this as the rescue for the economy to then turn around and go, oh, well, maybe it wasn't the rescue. A lot of people have to basically eat some humble pie, and these are not a group of people that really like to do that. Plus, they have the media totally on their side. So after the media, basically, the national media became a PR firm for Wall Street over this period. I've never seen such, really awful reporting on economic issues. People running around talking about the Great Depression. Serious people.
Yeah.
They were.
Well, it was funny. I was waiting to see how you were going to finish that sentence, saying you hadn't seen this sort of support, unquestioned support for and
economic policy.
Right.
Yes, I was being careful on that.
That's right, because obviously it's deja vu of the Iraq War.
Yeah. No, a lot of it had that same flavor, and and I've had arguments with people. I don't deny there was a crisis. Just like I wouldn't say Saddam was a good guy.
Right.
But that wasn't really the issue. Was do we have alternatives to
That's
this
right.
route?
It seems like the one could use the same sort of sets of questions. Are there alternatives? Are we asking root cause questions? Are we getting to the deeper need here? Are we going to a last resort too soon, etc.?
Exactly.
Okay. Let me ask you finally, and this will be my last question because we've got to wrap in a second. Do you have any feeling? There's a debate tonight. I have a feeling it might mostly be about character assassination, but do you have expectations of what we might see from either administration, or is the crisis moving too quickly to have a handle on that?
Well, I think McCain has made it pretty clear, at least, by virtue of his associations, even if he wouldn't stand up there today and say it, but, by virtue of his associations and his rhetoric until recently, that we'd have looked to do more of the same. At least if he can get away with it, Again, he might want to wish he hadn't said many of the things he'd said over the last however many years, but, he'd supported the policies that got us here. So it's very hard to imagine that he'd be a major reformer of Wall Street. On the other hand, Senator Obama is a mixed story. Clearly he's answering to a lot of people who do want to see serious reform. He's got obviously a lot of support from labor, from community groups, from other progressives in the country. At the same time, he's got a lot of Wall Street people among his very top advisors. I think if Senator Obama get in the White House, there'll probably be a real battle over the course of his economic policy.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing this time with us. Dean Baker, author of The Conservative Nanny State, How the Wealthy Use the Government to Stay Rich and Get Richer, and founder and one of the directors of the Council on Economic...
No, Center for Economic and Policy Research.
It's so funny. I'm looking at CEPR and going, I forgot. What does that stand for?
Yeah, I don't think I'm on the Council of Economic Advisors yet. So
Right.
Yeah.
The Center for Economic and Policy Research, that's CEPR.net. You can see all of his many op-eds, columns, articles, etc. You are very prolific. There's something up there, something new almost every day. Thank you, Dean Baker, for your wisdom on the economy.
Thanks a lot for having me on.